Okay, so some of you who have used Lightroom before, you might this might look familiar to you. Um, Lightroom is basically just a way of organizing and editing photos, and it's much more efficient than taking the photos into Photoshop. You can kind of see everything all at once here. You can kind of see your album strips, you can rate things, you can put them into albums, and then you can sync changes across imagery. So I've already imported these images from the site photos folder, which you would have downloaded in the assignment files. Has anybody not downloaded the assignment files yet and doesn't know where to find them? Okay, I'll assume you have all found that link on the Moreau page. But usually when you're going to import photos, you're just going to go to this little button called import here, or you might go to file, import photos and videos up here. And when you import, um, it's going to take you to a page. And this is something to pay attention to, which is like, if you want to know where your photos are actually going, what you need to look at is this little screen up here. So the source, that's obvious. You choose your folder or your SD card or whatever you're importing from. And then this says like to my catalog. Well, what the heck does that mean? Your catalog is stored in your pictures folder on your computer. You'll see here I have add. So this is just adding photos to a catalog without moving them. But usually if you're bringing in photos for the first time, you're going to need to like copy or move them somewhere. And you'll have the option depending. So if I go move, then I have a new dialog box over here where I can actually select like the location I want to put the images in. But since my photos, they're already in my catalog, I don't need to do anything here. So I'm just going to click cancel. I have these two folders. It's day 1 and day 2. And if I want to look at all of the images in both those folders at the same time, I can just highlight them. So I click shift to add the other folder, and now I can see all of the images in that folder. And navigating is super easy. You just use your arrows to kind of go through the images. And you see down here that I have like, there's this star rating system. You just use your numbers to rate your images. So I've rated images that I felt like had potential to develop. I gave them a 3-star rating. And then images that I decided I wanted to develop for the assignment, I gave them a 4-star rating. And that way I can just like know which images I'm using and which ones I can discard. You can filter your images here by just going to rated and then turning it on. And you can choose kind of the amount of stars that you want to rate for. So maybe you only want to see your 4-star images, the ones that you've selected, then those are right there. If you wanted to see all your selected images that you were considering, then you can see those all right there. So that's kind of importing and looking at images. And now the other tab that we use a lot is the develop tab. And this is where, Nicole, you will be doing edits on the photos themselves. Now on my Lightroom, I have been using this for like as long as Lightroom existed. So I have a lot of what are called presets. Now there's some default presets, and these are just like styles. And not super awesome. I don't know if I would recommend using them, but they can be kind of cool. If you just hover over them, you can see they like change the color and the tone and the contrast of the image. You can download presets from online. And I've found that like downloading presets is actually a really good way to learn about how other people process photos. But it really depends on how much time and like how interested you are in getting into development. For me, basically, if I'm starting an image, I just pay attention to this panel over here. So if I just close up some of these expanded panels right now, you can see all of the options that you have for development, basic developments, a tone curve, color, color grading, detail, lens corrections, transformations, effects, and calibration. So that sounds really complicated, but there's only a couple that you really need to pay attention to. In basic, what we have is a color profile, and then like white balance, which is important. And then you have a bunch of sliders, and these sliders, these ones are related to the white balance, so how warm or cool an image is. And then these ones are all about the sort of basic development techniques, the exposure, the contrast, highlights. If you pump up the highlights, you see it gets, all the highlights are brighter. If you bring them down, you can see it brings the sky back in. Um, and a lot of these sliders, they work best when you're using raw images. So the images I've given you, they've already gone through one set of processing for me to prepare them for you. So you won't be able to like get into the bones of these images and really like bring out a lot of extra detail. But if you were working with raw images from a camera, you would have access to a lot more of the details within those images. And you can just play with the sliders and see what they do. So obviously a lower contrast image, a higher contrast image, it's all going to depend on kind of what you are looking for in this base image. Shadows, lowering them makes everything darker, increasing them brings those shadows up. So oftentimes when we're trying to fix an image that's been improperly exposed, we might reduce the amount of highlights to kind of bring back detail in the highlighted areas, and then pop up the shadows so that we can bring out definition from darker areas. Whites and blacks, it sounds similar to highlights and shadows, but it's just the intensity of those hues. And then I try not to fiddle around too much with these. One thing I do use is the clarity. It's weird how like it actually does like kind of make everything look a little bit more crisp, but don't overuse it, because you can get to a point where it looks like it's called posterization, which is basically like if you zoom in on the image. This one doesn't get very zoomed in because it's not a super huge image, but it begins to look like it's been painted instead of like looking like a real photo. So be careful with that. And then vibrance, that can really be crazy. And saturation. I would skip over, if you're not familiar with using curve adjustments, you might probably want to skip over those, because your photo can get really weird really quickly. But maybe another time we'll talk about curve adjustments. And then there's these color sliders, which I actually use quite a lot. So if yours looks like this, you might be on the Hsl sliders. I like to put mine on color. That way you can target individual hues. So for example, these greens, and you can change the saturation just of the greens themselves. So I like this because, you know, sometimes you want to just, cameras tend to really oversaturate things. So you want to just like pull those down a little bit. Or maybe if you're going to be making this an autumn image, you want your greens to look more yellow. So you can pull your greens down to yellow, and you pull your yellows down to orange. You pull your oranges down to red, and suddenly we're reading like really autumn vibes here. It was already autumn vibes, but you can use these color sliders to enhance the colors in your images. So I use these quite a bit. One that I almost always change is the blue. I kind of like to desaturate, and then if I take down the luminance, it actually makes the bluer more intense. Like the amount of light pulsing through the blue is reduced. So I like to get rid of some saturation and also bring down the luminance. Color grading is a highly like complicated thing, and I'm not really good at it, so I'm just going to skip it. And then detail, this is like you can sharpen your images. I tend to not use this at all because hopefully my images are sharp when I've taken them. But lens corrections is something that you might use if you're importing photos for yourself. So when you import from your camera, you could have the opportunity to enable profile corrections. And basically, this is a library of different lens profiles that are embedded into Lightroom, and they'll make automatic adjustments. So if you know what type of camera or lens you're using, for example, I know that these ones were taken with a wide angle Canon lens. These have already been corrected. So now this has been over corrected, but they will correct for your distortion and aberrations. So that is something useful. You'll see a difference right away if you enable those profile corrections and try them out on your own camera. If you need to make manual corrections, for example, you see there's still a little bit of barrel distortion, which is when things are bowing out like this. They look like they're sort of curved on the edges, or pincushion distortion, where things are pulled in towards the center of the frame. You just want to make sure that your vertical elements are truly vertical. They're not pulling in or pulsing out. So you can always use this slider to sort of make a fine-tuned adjustment if you need to. I wouldn't worry about the defringe and the vignetting. Most cameras these days are so good that you don't even have to worry about that anymore. So I guess the second last thing I'll say in Lightroom for adjustments is you can use this transform area to make your verticals vertical and your horizontals horizontal. So let's get a good example of something that needs to be adjusted. I did a pretty good job adjusting these beforehand. All right, well, let's just try this one. So if you, it's because I already adjusted it, that's why. Okay, so if you grab this little grid tool here, you can, I'm just going to delete these so you can see what the image looked like before. So you see that there's this pole here, and like we really want in imagery our verticals to be vertical and our horizontals to be horizontal. So we don't want things tilting and kind of angling off the page. So we can use this grid tool, just grab it, and you see it gives you like a little magnified preview. I'm going to hit the center of that pole, and then I'm just going to drag it down to the center approximately as much as I can to the bottom. Now, nothing happened. Why? We don't have a reference for it to compare itself to. So if I go over here and use this drain pipe as my second vertical reference, now the picture has been adjusted. So now everything, those two elements are vertical. We don't really need to do any horizontal adjustments because everything looks pretty good there. But if you did, you could also lay out two horizontal guides and you can adjust your photo that way. Now, let's say we're going through and making some adjustments, and I'm just going to use auto adjustments as a starting point. So I just clicked on auto, and Lightroom kind of tries to detect everything that's happening in the photo and arrange it accordingly. And I'm also going to put on auto white balance. This is not how I would process my photos, but let's just say you're making adjustments and this is what you get. Now, in these color profiles, you can also take a look at some of the ones that have been automatically included with Lightroom. So let's say, and these color profiles are just a little bit interesting. Like you can take a look and they kind of do these hue and saturation adjustments for you, depending on the kind of style. I don't know what modern means, but apparently it means that things are weirdly saturated. So let's go with modern 8, just for fun. And then I'm going to use the slider to sort of tone it down a bit. So let's say we've made adjustments, we've straightened the image, we have made saturation adjustments to our sky, and we like the way things look. You can create your own preset just by adding a new preset here. So let's just call this the worst preset imaginable. And I often have groups, but so I'll just keep it with my user presets here. And you can see it's going to like copy. So I'm going to click off auto settings because that's what I used. And you can just check off the things that you want it to like remember from your processing and then create. And then instead of like having to go through and do all those adjustments for all my other photos, I can go over here and like go down into my my presets, which are user presets here. I have tons of ones for other things. What did I call it? The worst preset imaginable. Here it is. So it's actually not that bad on this one. But you can also like, this is really the power of Lightroom. So like if you select all your images and you're like, I know I want all of them to be processed the same, you just hit this sync button and go synchronize. and like everything will be synced across all those images so that you don't have to process each one individually, which is like really helpful compared to working in Photoshop, because in Photoshop you have to do everything one step at a time.